Heyo, what's good? Hope you're doing well. Facebuster Wrestling Podcast is back, and boy am I relieved now. After having seen Smackdown and another Raw since the tragedy that was the post-WrestleMania Raw of just over a week ago, we got some quality programming. Vince has been working remotely, whatever that entails. Apparently, he's been making just minor adjustments to the script from his undisclosed remote location. And based on what we've gotten so far out of these two preceding shows in the April 7th SmackDown and the April 10th Raw, hopefully it stays that way. Hopefully Vince keeps his grubby little paws away from the main script and just makes a few minor adjustments here and there where he sees fit. It was clearly much more Triple H-esque. These two episodes of SmackDown and Raw, they harkened back on the days that Triple H was firmly in control of creative. The flow of the shows, much more smooth. The angles made sense. The scripts made sense. The creative made sense. It was interesting. It was captivating. And it got back to addressing continuity within the creative process of these stories. If that one Raw was the one instance that we had to live through where Vince grabbed control, perhaps out of ego from the recent sale of WWE, or perhaps because he felt it was such an important night, being that it was the post-WrestleMania Raw, and they had just sold the company, and he wanted to make sure, in his mind at least, that the post-WrestleMania Raw was as good as it gets, so that the new controlling interests in the company would see that WWE programming on television is good, and also that Vince McMahon is a viable contributor to the show when necessary. I'm sure in his mind, that was exactly what he accomplished. He came away from that show thinking, man, I really showed those guys, if they ever need me, I'm not beyond reach. If you liked what you saw, you have my number, and I will come back and run the show again. But what everyone else in the world saw was a horrible dumpster fire of a Monday Night Raw on what was supposed to be the most important Monday Night Raw of the year. So, the status of these shows is finally not in such turmoil. I don't feel as negatively moving forward that we're going to get dumpster fire after dumpster fire for Raw and SmackDown. As long as Vince is far away and remotely making minor adjustments, I see no issue. These shows were fine. I'd go as far as to say that they were actually good. I enjoyed them. And, you know, one of these episodes, that being the April 10th edition of Raw, was not without complications, and we'll get into that later. Let's talk about SmackDown first. So some important news in the world of WWE was announced on the SmackDown, the April 7th edition of SmackDown. Triple H comes out, and this was his second announcement of the week. This was his second scheduled appearance to make an announcement. One being on Raw, the ill-fated Raw that we all have come to hate so dearly, and this episode of SmackDown. And he doesn't open the show, but he comes out a little later. And a little bit more lip service, kind of like what we got on Raw. And as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, oh God, here we go again. It's just going to be another instance of one of the heads of the company sort of, sugarcoating how good WrestleMania was. Not really sugarcoating. WrestleMania was pretty good. But just, doing the lip service. WrestleMania sold this many tickets and had this rating and these hours of digital views so far and this much social media impact. It was trending here and there and blah, 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 blah. But that wasn't all we got. We got a little bit of that, but we also have the announcement that the draft is returning to WWE. This came as a complete shock to me, honestly, because earlier that very day, I had read an article or two addressing the state of the WWE Draft in the future, in that they haven't done it in a couple years, it seems to have lost its necessity, especially considering that WWE has sort of relinquished the importance of the brand separation. We've all noticed some of the stars going back and forth between shows. We used to have that stupid rule where I forget the parameters, the exact wording of it, but one superstar could make a certain amount of appearance on the opposing show, like once every quarter of the year, some stupid shit like that. Always dumb. That was never a good idea, and it was never interesting. At any given time, they could have any superstar in any show. We all know that. So that rule was bullshit, and clearly they saw that it wasn't really a viable option to make things interesting or to fuel any sort of SmackDown versus Raw feud. That feud seems to be done with. The brand split, as we knew it, seems to be done with. So this, and also this article, or these articles that I read, speculated that the draft was done. There would be no more drafts, at least any in the near future. I read this the morning of this SmackDown, before this SmackDown aired. And then, watching SmackDown, of course, they announced that the WWE Draft is back. So much for what insiders think or have to say or speculate about. It's exactly that, speculation. You got to take it with a grain of salt, which I didn't. Because I saw the validity in what they were saying, and that what's the point of a draft if there's really no longer a brand split? Superstars are crossing over left and right whenever they want, whenever creative sees fit to put them on one show or the other. So clearly, this makes you think, right? What purpose does the draft serve if this is the state of the WWE? Nobody remains static on one show anymore. Everyone's on every show, almost. At least recently. At least in the last few months, maybe even longer. What is the point of the draft unless you are to reincorporate the idea that the brands are split and superstars need to remain static on one show or another? What is the point of this if anyone could go anywhere at any given time? Is this going to be, are we going to get that sort of separation again? Is that the best thing for creative moving forward, to keep certain superstars isolated on one television show? One of the things Triple H emphasized is that every superstar is eligible for this. Every superstar has always been eligible for the draft. Reading between the lines, what exactly does that mean? Because it seems to me that he meant to emphasize that for a reason. Every superstar is eligible. Well, that's always been the case, right? Nobody who's been ineligible in the past. I mean, does this mean that they're splitting tag teams and factions? Does that mean that individual shows cannot draft an entire team, be it a tag team or a stable? There could be some pretty serious creative implications from this statement alone. Every superstar is eligible. What do you think that means? Every superstar has always been eligible. I don't get that. I've tried thinking about this deeply, and the only thing I can think of is that they're going to basically add all of NXT. So, in a way, Triple H is saying every single superstar on the WWE roster, SmackDown, Raw, Legends, NXT. I mean, beyond that, what superstars would be left out of the crop if every superstar wasn't eligible? There's got to be more to this. They haven't announced a specific date yet for the draft, so I imagine more details are going to emerge. And in fact, they've been very vague and cryptic about when this is going to take place. Triple H only said in a few short weeks. So a few short weeks could that could be this summer for all we know. I do want to do at some point a draft prediction show, a little fantasy booking, but I also want some more details to emerge before I do that, because I don't know what this detail, every superstar is eligible, I don't know what that completely entails. And it's got to be, just based on the way he emphasized it, it's got to be something important and not something that we're used to seeing. Because to me, once again, to my ears and brain, every superstar eligible has always been the case. So let's wait for more details to come out surrounding the draft. Um, until then, all of us, we can only speculate on what that means. I also considered, well, superstar, that, WWE refers to their roster as superstars, right? But given the merger, not, well, kind of merger, but given the convergence within Endeavor of WWE and UFC, does this mean that certain people from UFC are going to be eligible? Are they considering UFC fighters to be superstars now, since they are under the same umbrella, being Endeavor? That could be interesting. That could also be absolutely devastating, because if you get ahead of yourself, if you're WWE and you get ahead of yourself and you try to capitalize on the excitement of this Endeavor purchase, in that UFC and WWE are now under the same umbrella, and you implement UFC men and women into this draft to create buzz, to do something that could potentially be like a viral sensation for your company. Drafting people like this, UFC superstars or UFC fighters, could mean that you're drafting a lot of people that are not ready to participate in WWE wrestling matches. Not everyone is Ronda Rousey, not everyone is Brock Lesnar. These guys can fight for real, but do they know how to take wrestling bumps? Are they aware of the mechanics and psychology that go into wrestling matches? Not just beating the shit out of each other for real, like legitimate beating the shit out of each other. So if that's something that happens, that could be, like I said, really interesting or really fucking terrible. And we're gonna get a bunch of like Conor McGregor's and Amanda Nunes's that are big names, but you're just drafting them for the buzz, and they won't necessarily make a difference, at least on the WWE side. Unless some of these people are secretly getting ready to be WWE superstars and are learning the ways of professional wrestling, this could be a terrible decision if that's the direction that they decide to go in this being every superstar is eligible. We'll see. The other thing I wanted to mention is that another emphasis from Triple H was that this draft will change the game. Again, another veiled statement meant to inspire thought in the fans, and it meant to inspire speculation in fans of WWE. Because what draft has not sort of changed the game? There's got to be something more to this draft. Reading between the lines, just based on what Triple H has given us in little verbal tidbits here and there is something to come of this draft that will be unique from every other draft that has come and gone in the past. This will not be your grandfather's WWE draft. This is something new. This will change the game. This is going to be different. Every superstar is eligible. Can you believe it? Every superstar? But Triple H, every superstar was eligible before. No, this time every superstar is eligible. But what? It's gonna change the game. What? Every other draft sort of changed the game because it moved superstars from one show to the other, and it was interesting and intriguing, and it created new stories and angles for our favorite wrestlers. No, you don't get it. This is gonna change the game. There is more to this. This is more than meets the eye. Triple H knows something that we don't about the draft. It's obviously intentional that they're not being completely transparent about everything draft related coming up here. But there's a lot to think about. And as much as I am excited for it, and as much as I want to do a draft prediction show and play Fantasy Booker, I don't want to get ahead of myself on that. Because I don't want to do a very traditional draft prediction and have it be far more game-changing than I am anticipating it to be. This could be something very, very different. I wouldn't put it past Triple H. As I said about WrestleMania, this is going to be Triple H's first WrestleMania. So there's bound to be this and that as far as quality storytelling and surprises and whatnot. Fell a little short of that, but this is what I also felt about every major premium live event that has been under the creative control of Triple H. That's why I was slightly disappointed in the Royal Rumble. This past Royal Rumble was Triple H's first Royal Rumble in charge of creative. So I expected a little bit more oomph, a little bit more pop, some more surprises, some shocking Rumble entrants. Not really any. So I was slightly disappointed in that. First SummerSlam under Triple H control. That sort of, was more along the lines of what I expected in a first Triple H this or that. That provided more excitement. That provided more surprises. This is going to be Triple H's first draft. So I do expect there to be something a little bit different. I do expect some surprises and some interesting new wrinkles for this draft that we have not seen before. So I believe him when he emphasizes every superstar is eligible as being something different. Even if we hear that and go, that's not different, that's been the case all along. I believe Triple H when he emphasizes it's going to change the game, even though to us we think, well, it's the draft. It's always changed the game. No, there's something more to this, and if there isn't, I'm going to be disappointed. It's going to feel a little bit like the Rumble and the lack of surprise entrance in it. I expected more from Triple H then. I expect more from Triple H now, and only time will tell. We can just fantasy book in our heads until then. So, besides the draft, SmackDown felt way more Triple H-y. Not a whole lot going on, but the storytelling, the creative involved in this, the psychology behind it, you could tell there was far more thought put into it. You can tell you can tell that the script wasn't ripped up and rewritten and ripped up and rewritten and ripped up, rewritten. This was a Triple H SmackDown, and I think it was very clear. As far as big things happening, we didn't get a whole heck of a lot. I was a little surprised that the Brawling Brutes beat Imperium. I would have thought they'd want to keep pushing the dominance of Gunther and Imperium. I don't think it really hurts them. It kind of gives a little bit more steam back to the Brawling Brutes, because we haven't seen much of Ridge and Butch in a while. They've been somewhat absent in the period of Sheamus and Drew kind of going back and forth for wanting to face Gunther for the IC title and that whole thing. Haven't seen much of them. It was a way to get them back involved. It's good to have another faction in full, someone to go against another faction like Imperium. So, outcome a little surprising, but, not a big deal. I was more surprised by Ricochet beating Ivar, which, when you think about the two of them, it makes sense, but when you're looking at the two of them, it makes absolutely zero sense. You'd think Ivar would just straight up maul Ricochet. But they gave this to Ricochet, and this kind of makes me a little bit worried for the Viking Raiders. Not that I have a lot of emotional investment in this team. I liked them far more when they were on NXT, and they were still doing sort of the War Machine gimmick in a way. But the Viking Raiders, they've been rebuilt and repackaged and rebuilt and repackaged, and even with Sarah Logan as Valhalla, it still seems to come up a little short. Don't get me wrong, they've, in particular with Drew and Sheamus as their tag team opponents, they've had some really strong matches on SmackDown over the past couple months. Eric, for some reason, was not here. Braun Strowman wasn't there. Maybe somebody was sick or injured or unavailable, I don't know. but Ricochet beats Ivar somewhat surprisingly. Ricochet is much higher on the food chain, so it makes sense. Liv Morgan, Raquel beating Natalya and Shotzi, who are now going by one of the worst tag team names that I've ever heard, at least in recent memory. The ballsy, the what? The ballsy baddies, which you thought the Brawling Brutes was a terrible name with heavy B alliteration. The ballsy baddies take the new crown in that department. You know, they're pushing Liv Morgan, Raquel Rodriguez. Obviously, they won the tag titles on Raw. We'll get into that later. But it didn't make sense to me coming out of WrestleMania why Liv and Raquel got the opportunity at number one contenders over Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler, because Shayna Baszler and Ronda Rousey had just won that Fatal 4-Way showcase at WrestleMania. Yet they were not offered to compete for number one contendership for the women's tag titles. That didn't make sense to me. But now, you know, obviously Raquel Rodriguez, it makes sense. I'm sure they want the belt on her, or a belt on her, going into Backlash in Puerto Rico, just more Latin representation. So I get it. Just logistically, having them get that shot over Ronda and Shayna, who had just beaten them at WrestleMania, it didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me, but also I get it. With Backlash in Puerto Rico coming up, Raquel Rodriguez, it makes sense, and I'm cool with that. At that point, we heard from Triple H. We got Judgment Day beating the LWO and Rey Mysterio. And then Sami Zayn and Jey Uso. Man, just throughout the night, more great storytelling and psychology from these two. These two are both at the top of the game when it comes to adding more to the story and just making it more heartfelt and emotional. We really need to appreciate this while it's happening, because we don't get this very often. Two guys, especially in Sami Zayn, but Jey Uso as well, who's a fantastic emoter and portrayer of emotion. Not on Sami's level. Sami is like top shelf, number one, A+ when it comes to emotional storytelling and psychology and all of that. But Jey he's close, man. Jey is really close. He's damn good when it comes to storytelling and facial expressions and being emotional. It really shines through with these two. They do a good job of making sure we know that their complicated relationship is not over. They do a good job of making sure to let us know that there's more to this story, and it's not over just because Sami and Kevin won the belts and WrestleMania is over. This story goes on. This story is far from its end as far as I'm concerned. And I'm glad, too, because it's a captivating and compelling story. I'm happy to see this continue to play out. Sami and Jey continue to do a great job. Solo gets involved, and Jey gets the victory, which I think was a good thing. The Usos need a little bit of momentum back. They need a little fire back after losing their belts, and this makes them appear to still be strong. So, also we get Matt Riddle coming down to help Sami Zayn, because earlier in the night, Solo had attacked Kevin Owens and took him out. So now Matt Riddle is firmly planted in this story as sort of the third head of the Sami and KO team, which is odd to me because I really thought before WrestleMania and heading into WrestleMania that moving forward post WrestleMania, the conglomerate, the faction unofficially would be KO, Zayn, and Cody Rhodes, sort of working together in conjunction to take down the Bloodline. But now it's, as Cody Rhodes is kind of mildly separated from that story so that he can deal with Brock Lesnar, it looks as though Matt Riddle is going to be the third head on the three-headed monster of the guys going after the Bloodline, which makes sense continuity-wise. Again, that's very important, and I'm glad they keep that in check. Rehab aside, suspension aside, Matt Riddle got storyline taken out by the Bloodline and Solo Sikoa. So it makes sense for Riddle to come back and sort of plant himself in this as he is seeking revenge. So I don't really have a problem with it. It feels a little weird right now, just because Riddle's been gone for so long, and Sammy and Kevin and Cody have kind of been the thing. But now it appears that it'll be Sammy, KO, and Matt Riddle. So that was SmackDown. A pleasant relief coming out of that Raw, don't you think? Considering we all feared for the worst after that awful Monday Night Raw following WrestleMania. So we get a little bit of clarity as far as WWE creative control and who is mostly in charge moving forward. I think, considering the two examples we've been given in this past Raw and this past SmackDown, I think WWE is finally back in good hands. That Monday night was just hopefully a one-off. It was a fever dream of what used to be. I never want to experience that again. I'm sure you don't either. And just getting this SmackDown out there, it took a lot of fear out of me that things were going to go back to the way that they were for so long, and we were going to get terrible night after terrible night, and it was going to be a chore again to watch these shows. Thankfully, SmackDown eased me back from that ledge, and I enjoyed this SmackDown. And this Raw that we're about to talk about, I also enjoyed. And it was a weird one. It was a strange Raw. It wasn't normal. Not because Vince had his hands all over it. Vince wasn't ripping up script after script this time. The complication that arose and the reason things needed to be heavily rewritten were due to travel issues, flight complications. There were a handful of major Raw stars that did not make it on this show. Bianca Belair was absent. The Street Profits weren't there. Seth Rollins was not there. Half of Judgment Day was not there. Who else? A few other notable superstars. I think this also affected Sami Zayn and Matt Riddle, allegedly, but they conveniently showed up at the end of the show. So I'm wondering if maybe Triple H used the real legitimate flight issues and incorporated into the script a little bit in saying that Sammy and Matt Riddle were not there, so Kevin Owens was going to be on his own tonight. I wonder if Sammy and Matt actually really, they were part of the crop of guys and girls that made it to the show on time. But considering they had to address the flight issues on the show, and they were real, there were actual flight issues, that Triple H thought to himself, you know what, we could use this in the story a little bit. Sammy, Matt, we're going to say that you guys were on the plane that didn't make it here. You guys are stuck, and you might not make it, but also you might. So, clever, if that were the case. Also, if that wasn't the case, and Matt and Sammy did make it at the very last minute, that had to have been a nail-biting night for Triple H. If he wrote that into the script, and he legitimately had to wait for these guys to show up at the last minute to implement them into the show like this. I kind of doubt that. I kind of do think Zayn and Riddle were there, and he just sort of used the flight issues as a bit of a storyline tweak to get them at the end of the show running in to make the last minute save before Kevin Owens got killed by Solo Sikoa and the Usos. Nonetheless, the first thing as a whole that I noticed on this Raw was the matches seemed to be a lot longer, and I think that was to compensate for the lack of talent available, which makes sense. And it didn't, if this were Vince handling this issue, this might have been a problem. But Triple H really, again, Vince was not there. He was not in Seattle for this show. He was working remotely. But Triple H handled this really well. And the show, just because there were maybe a couple fewer matches, but the matches were longer, there were maybe a couple fewer segments, but the segments were longer. The flow of the show, as far as I'm concerned, experienced no issues whatsoever. It flowed well. The storyline arcs and continuity still made sense and were pulled off with relative ease. The night started on they stumbled a bit out of the gate. And that's not anyone else's fault except Dominic Mysterio. And I'm not trying to shit on Dominic Mysterio, but this guy was really having a hard time saying anything tonight. And I gotta give Dom credit. He didn't react to it. He didn't, that didn't stop him from completing his verbal tirade against his father, Ray, standing in the ring. He kept going. He didn't acknowledge his mistakes. He just pushed through. Dom was just like, yeah, I fucked up. I didn't say that right. I'm just going to keep on rolling. So good on him. He sounded like an idiot, but he didn't let that grind him to a halt. He just kept moving. And that's the mind of a vet. That's the resolve of a veteran microphone worker. A bit of a disaster, but not too big of a deal. It also sort of fits Dom's character because he's kind of a doofy douchebag. So mixing up a few words isn't gonna make him as a character crumble to the ground. It almost sort of enhances him as a hateable guy. So out of that, Ray challenges Dom to a rematch. Dom denies that, so Finn Balor comes out and we get Finn Balor versus Rey Mysterio. And Finn Balor beat him, but of course with help from Dom. We go on to get quite a surprising situation with Becky Lynch and substitute tag team champion Trish Stratus stepping in for Lita, who we saw in the aftermath of a attack in the backstage area. Becky thought it was Liv and Raquel because they were the ones that stumbled upon Lita as she laid there, groaning and what have you. Becky didn't even think it would be the person who we would pretty much find out it was. And that would be Trish. Becky Lynch and Trish are beat in, honestly, a bit of a sloppy match by Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, who become the new women's tag team champs. Again, makes sense, heading in the Backlash. But at the end of this match, at the end of this really sort of messy, weird match, it just felt weird. It didn't look right at times. And I thought that maybe that was due to Trish actually needing to step into Lita, who maybe had a minor injury and wasn't cleared to compete. So I thought maybe that messed with the chemistry of the match. That was not the case at all. The match was just messy because they knew this was going to happen. Either way, at the end of the match, Trish takes the pin and Becky is sort of pulling her up and saying whatever she's saying, probably it's okay, whatever, don't worry about it. And Trish appears to be apologizing profusely. But as Lynch goes to leave, we see Trish attack Becky Lynch. People were speculating this was going to happen at WrestleMania. And at the time, on my WrestleMania prediction show, I suggested that doesn't make any sense. Why would Trish do that? She's not going to come back full time. She's got other things going on. She, like Lita, is going to be here for a cup of coffee and lose the title and be on with her life outside of the ring, and then eventually probably come back for a SummerSlam spot or WrestleMania spot in the future, as they are want to do as WWE Hall of Fame legends. They do that. They show up, they're there for a month or two, they do the premium live event, and then they go. So I thought that made no sense. Why turn Trish heel when this is a short-term thing? And we saw Damage Control put hands on Trish. They beat her up a couple of times in the back, and then they had encounters in the ring and all of that. Trish clearly wasn't working on the side of Damage Control, so I thought it made no sense to have Trish turn heel on Becky and Lita. But apparently, those people that speculated that were not so wrong after all, and I was slightly wrong. I was right in the fact that it made no sense for Trish to turn on Lita just because, or because of affiliation with Damage Control or Bayley, not at WrestleMania. I called that. That made sense. But to have it happen anyway boggles my mind a little bit. Obviously, Trish is going to stick around for a little bit longer. Maybe Lita sticks around for a little bit longer. Maybe this attack was to write her off TV so she could ride off into the sunset until the next major premium live event where they need her or ask her to be there. But I still don't get Trish turning on Becky on Monday Night Raw. Trish is too likable to make sense as a heel to me. Like, I don't want to boo Trish Stratus. I don't get it. They have something planned, clearly, but I don't get it right now. So it looks as though Becky Lynch is going to feud with Trish. Maybe Lita is involved in that somehow. But what happens moving forward with these two, I have no idea. This is going to be interesting to see what they do with this moving forward. I did not expect this at all. Honestly, even after the Lita attack, I thought it was going to be revealed to be Bayley or Damage Control. But even in thinking about that now, that just makes too much sense, right? Either way, Liv and Raquel, they're the new champions. Trish is the heel. I call bullshit. And I guess Becky and Trish are going to be duking it out moving forward. But besides that, man, Bobby Lashley and Bronson Reed. This was exciting. This was great. They planted the seeds for this last week when Bronson Reed came up to Bobby Lashley in the back and essentially challenged him. So this wasn't like a hastily planned, nobody else is here, let's have these guys fight. This is something that's been planned, and I'm excited about it. This made Bronson Reed look as strong as he needs to look. This lends legitimacy to Bronson Reed moving forward. Something they've sort of tried to give to him in small doses. What with his performance in the Elimination Chamber, that made him look real good. His performance in the Andre the Giant Battle Royal, that, he was one of the last guys in there with Bobby Lashley. That made him look good. But this, cementing this as a potential rivalry moving forward, two giant behemoths, what a perfect matchup. And what a way to elevate Bronson Reed. I am excited about this. Bobby Lashley got the win. I'm not upset about that at all. Bobby Lashley needed to beat Bronson Reed in this first match of what I hope is many matches that come from these two. But had Bronson Reed won, I wouldn't have been too surprised because they really allowed him to look fucking strong in this match. This is going to be a feud I will be excited to see in the future. One of these days, in one of these matches, Bronson Reed is going to get the best of Bobby Lashley, and it's not going to hurt Bobby Lashley at all. It's just going to elevate a new giant guy into the stratosphere of elite-level giants. And they need that, especially after Omos got his ass handed to him by Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. They need another huge-ass dude who can dominate and destroy 3/4 of the locker room, like Bobby Lashley does, like Brock Lesnar does. And Bronson Reed deserves it. Bronson Reed, since moving to Raw, has been kind of on and off television. I remember they brought him in to help The Miz win I don't even remember. I think it was like a ladder match. I forgot what that was for. But I was a little nervous. I thought they were going to put those two together, Reed and The Miz. Thankfully, they sort of cast that off as Miz paid Bronson Reed to help him. And that was that. I think a week or two after that, The Miz asked Bronson Reed for his help again, and Reed essentially said, kind of like last time, you got to pay up, man. I don't work for free. So yes, Bronson has been on and off TV a little bit, but recently he's been more of a contributor, and he has looked really good. So this shows they have faith, they have confidence in Bronson, and I think it's well-deserved, and I'm excited to see what they can do with him in the future. This feud is exactly what this guy needs, and it's going to not only elevate Bronson Reed, it's not going to hurt Bobby Lashley at all to sort of give one to this guy. I think, if anything, it's going to make Bobby look good, too, because he has almost an equal competitor. These two together, I think, are going to be gold. So after that, we hear from Cody Rhodes. He addresses the Brock Lesnar attack. Nothing too surprising. He essentially just says, he's afraid of Brock Lesnar, but he's going to fight him. Nothing groundbreaking. It is what it is. a really pretty decent match, the Usos versus Alpha Academy. Otis is sort of showing off his face chops again, doing the wiggles and the dances and the caterpillar and the gestures to the crowd. Makes sense. I've said this before. I think if Otis ultimately gets into Maximum Male Models full time, he'll still be a face, even if that faction is kind of heelish. People are still wanting to cheer Otis. I think he's going to remain a face, even if he aligns with them. And I think if Alpha Academy splits up, this won't be one guy turns face, one guy turns heel, which is what you typically expect from a tag team split. I think the nuance in this story is that Otis splits from his partner, but sort of fully converts into a face, and in that, in turn, the vulnerability and the sadness that Chad Gable is going to portray after that takes place is going to make him a face as well, a sympathetic face. What I've seen recently in these backstage segments involving Otis, Chad Gable's kind of playing into it a little bit, right? He's not exactly against it completely. He's sort of supporting Otis a little bit in his modeling endeavors. But at the same time, like we saw in this match on Raw, he gets on Otis's case when he starts to get a little bit over the top in the strutting and the showing off. He wants Otis to focus. So I'm not sure if this is even going to be a complete split up of Alpha Academy. I almost think that Chad Gable will be along for the ride in a way. But I'm not sure this is even going to split up Alpha Academy. I think it's going to add a layer in that relationship. Otis is going to get a chance to show off his modeling charisma and personality, while Chad Gable is sort of harvesting sympathetic babyface emotions from the crowd. We'll see where this goes. The Usos beat Alpha Academy, but they continue to make Chad Gable look really good. Even if Alpha Academy does split up and Gable has to be a single superstar for a while, he'll do just fine for himself. I'd love to see that guy in the U.S. title picture. I think he'd go great with Austin Theory as a rival. I wouldn't mind seeing him in the IC title picture. It'd be a cool David and Goliath story with Gable and Gunther. And we've seen what Gable can do with big guys as recent as WrestleMania, when he gave that rolling German suplex to Braun Strowman and essentially became a viral moment. So Gable is not going to be lost in the land of giants if he faces a guy like Gunther. He'll be just fine. So Otis can go and do his goofy gimmick with Maximum Male Models, who, by the way, those two guys, Maxine aside, Massey and Mansois, those two are legitimately hilarious. I don't know if you've seen any of the stuff that they've done on WWE's YouTube or the stuff that they post on Twitter most recently. They've done some stuff on Up, Up, Down, Down. Those guys are funny. They need to find a way to get that onto the show, because they are actually pretty fucking hysterical. Most people hear Maximum Male Models and they groan a little bit. They think it's boring. They think it's a tired gimmick. Yeah, at face value, sure. But if you see Massey and Mansois really display their personality on camera, those two are fucking hilarious, dude. I encourage you to look up anything of theirs on WWE's YouTube channel or anywhere on social media. They're great. So that has legs. Gable is a single guy, has legs. Them staying together also has legs. But there will be some weird layers and nuance involved if that's the case. Finally, we get some dissension and Damage Control. I've been calling for this for some time now. For longer than I've done a podcast, I've been calling for this. Damage Control was exciting at first. It was new. It was interesting. It has not worked. It's been stale. It's been bland. The three don't go well together. The chemistry is not there. It is a failed experiment, and I've been calling for its demise for at least a couple months now. I don't think Damage Control worked up and succeeded at what they were supposed to be. Bayley, as a heel, has had her moments, especially in the Thunderdome era. Like, she really shined through as a heel, I think, then, and when she was with Sasha Banks and she was giving shit to Michael Cole every week. She really played that well. But now I think it's run its course. I think it's time for Bayley to change a little bit, whether that's full-on babyface NXT Bayley, I don't know. But Damage Control needs to separate. And they've finally, on this Raw, planted those seeds. Bayley was supposed to have an opportunity in a triple threat match to determine the number one contender for Bianca Belair's Raw Women's Championship. This was going to be Bayley versus Piper Niven versus Michin. And instead, when Bayley told Dakota Kai and Io Sky about it, Io Sky, straight up gangster, was like, no, fuck no. You had your opportunity. It should be one of us. And Bayley was like, oh, all right. Cool. Sorry. I will see about maybe one of you two taking my place. I'll just talk to Adam Pearce, maybe? And Io was like, yeah, you fucking do that. And then, like, dude, it was kind of great. I'm good. Even in this match, Io looked like the Io we know and love from NXT. The NXT version of Io showed up on this Raw. She looked fantastic. Io has floundered in Damage Control. Even when they held the tag team titles, she still was not herself. It was like she was like a anchored down version of her old self. She was a shell of herself. Even Dakota Kai to a certain degree. Like, Dakota Kai was never at the level of Io Sky, or as we knew her, Io Shirai. But even she seemed like a shell of herself, of what she was in NXT. She had many layers in NXT. She was a Bayley level babyface at one point, and then she turned on Tegan Nox, and she was like a kind of a sniveling heel, and then she went crazy and started talking to voices in her head, and she portrayed a lot of characters pretty decently. And in Damage Control, she's just been kind of like just nobody, really. I've been really disappointed with Damage Control. I'm glad they're planting seeds of dissension, finally. Clearly, Io Sky is back, at least I hope, long term. This is what I've wanted for a while, so I was glad to see this. Io Sky was the one named in Bayley's place to take part in this triple threat. Io Sky won decisively, and she is now the number one contender to the Raw Women's Championship. Thank you. I'm so happy about that. Decent match. Michin, I think, looked a lot better than she's looked. Piper continues to improve as sort of a powerhouse. Doudrop really did some damage to her as a character, but I think she's starting to get back to what she was in NXT UK and even before that. This was a pretty decent match. I'm glad Io won. That needed to happen. And hopefully, Damage Control does not last much longer. And then we get the main event, Kevin Owens, Solo Sikoa. Kevin Owens still nursing the knee injury. Solo's out there with the Usos. Kevin has nobody because, again, supposedly, Sami Zayn and Matt Riddle are affected by the flight issues. Man, I continue to just like Solo Sikoa more and more. He continues to improve on a weekly basis. This guy is going to be somebody big in the future. Not just the enforcer for the bloodline. This guy is going to be at the top of the card in a matter of years, maybe months. This guy is one of the future faces of WWE. And if you don't see that, I don't know what you're watching, because this guy is great. And he's only going to get better. He's still young and learning, and man, Solo's got it. He has got it. But really good match, what you would expect it from these two guys. Of course, the Usos get involved. Solo takes advantage of it and beats Kevin Owens. Again, kind of like Sami Zayn and Jey Uso on Smackdown. This sort of gives more momentum back, more fire back to the bloodline. Kevin Owens didn't need the victory. He's a tag team champion now. They are fresh off the WrestleMania victory, so he can take this loss, especially considering he's banged up. And at the end of the match, the Usos and Solo take advantage of Owens being by himself, and wouldn't you know it, we see backstage Sami Zayn and Matt Riddle just showed up conveniently and are running towards the arena, and they finally get down there and help Kevin. It writes itself. They fend off the Usos and Solo, and they stand together to end the show in the ring as they bicker back and forth with the bloodline. So, much better. Even with the issues, with the travel issues, Triple H still put together a cohesive show with logical storytelling and continuity and compelling matches. There wasn't really a bad match on this card. I guess, the Becky and Trish versus Liv and Raquel match, a little messy, a little sloppy, but at least there was like a major storyline development off of it. 2, actually, in New Champions and the Trish heel turn. But good Raw, immaculate Raw if you put it in comparison with last week's Raw. But you can tell the difference, right? I'm not the only one. You can tell when Vince is there, and you can tell when Vince is gone. It's clear to me as somebody who's been watching this product for decades at this point. The Triple H shows versus the Vince McMahon shows have both individually have different feels to them, different flows to them. Triple H's flow well, they make sense, they're entertaining, whereas Vince McMahon's come off as jagged, misplaced car wrecks, atrocities of creative script writing. No flow, no continuity, no mention of the past. There's such stark contrast between the two styles. And just having the one Vince-led show from last week, just isolate that show and remember how it made you feel. Chances are, if you're watching one of these shows and you feel that way again, Vince is there. But if you get a free-flowing, creative, and cohesive show like we did tonight, chances are Vince is in a dungeon somewhere on a laptop sending DMs to Triple H telling him to change something really minute. Let's keep it that way. Much better. Thank you. We can all move forward as wrestling fans, breathing a sigh of relief that hopefully this is how it is moving forward. This is what we want to see. This is what we got used to for 6 to 7 months. So let's take it as a positive. This was a win for us, wrestling fans, WWE fans. Let's just savor it in case we never get it again, God forbid. But I want to touch quickly on NXT because that happened tonight. I'm doing this show Tuesday night. NXT was a good show. And thankfully, it wasn't the only good WWE show this week. Touching on a few things, I'm not going to go over the whole card. I'm impressed with the way Braun Breaker played the heel role in his first appearance as a bad guy. He came out, he interrupted Chase U's MVP celebration for Duke Hudson, and he was a good dick. He played a dick pretty well. I am impressed. And still happy that they decided to move this direction in converting Braun into an asshole. It makes sense. The crowd turning on him was something that Shawn Michaels and WWE/NXT noticed and used for their storyline. As you remember, like I mentioned before, Jinder calling him out for that very thing in the middle of the NXT ring on a televised program. Acknowledging, Braun, the fans are turning on you, Braun. That's unheard of. When has that been publicly acknowledged on a WWE program in the past. I can't think of one. Can you? That's usually something that's kept behind closed doors. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want us to notice it. It doesn't, uh, it only goes against the storylines they're trying to move forward. This, they acknowledged it and used it for storyline progression and character development. Braun needs to show NXT what he has as a different character. And this was the perfect time to do it, noticing that the fans had turned on him, acknowledging it via Ginger's promo, and then doing it not too long afterward. That's really good storytelling and storyline progression and character development. Using the fans as a gauge for what they want and how they react. Using that to develop a character, to change a character, to add a twist and turn, to make something different. That's something that Vince McMahon almost never did. In fact, I'm sure he hated having to do things like that. A la Daniel Bryan back in the day, when the fans were all for Daniel Bryan winning the WWE Championship. You gotta believe Vince McMahon was like, fuck you for making me do this. But NXT, Shawn Michaels, whoever else is in control back there, they did a great job of acknowledging the real situation at hand, the real reaction that Braun Breaker was starting to receive, and use it to your advantage. Use it for his character development. Use it as a catalyst for what you need anyway. You need, whether or not the fans were reacting this way to Braun Breaker, at some point they need to see another side of Braun. And this was the perfect vehicle for bringing that change about. So I like what I see from heel Braun so far. We'll see how he does long term with this new character, this new persona. Another thing, look, Eddie Thorpe. Okay, I gotta admit, I hate to say this, he's been a little bit underwhelming to me. Eddie Thorpe, otherwise known as Carl Fredericks. I don't know if he's clearly good, but I think this was kind of like, look, we got Dragon Lee and Eddie Thorpe sort of debuting at roughly the same time. And it's similar to how I felt when Karrion Kross and Timothy Thatcher debuted at roughly the same time. Karrion Kross was like this overwhelmingly big personality, this dystopian, like, post-apocalyptic character with Scarlet, and it just had such a big picture quality to it. Whereas Timothy Thatcher, I loved Timothy Thatcher in NXT, but he was more subdued. He was just a tough guy. But Karrion Kross was like this big production and this incredibly visual entrance and all the special effects and whatnot. And I think that's almost what Eddie Thorpe is suffering from, personally, to me, in debuting at roughly the same time as Dragon Lee, who is sort of this, not necessarily a big personality, but to big fanfare, he has debuted, and he was highly anticipated and indie darling. Not that Eddie Thorpe wasn't as Carl Fredericks, but you know, they give Dragon Lee this cool entrance, and might I add, what is possibly the sickest entrance music in NXT at the moment. That shit goes off, man. Dragon Lee's entrance music, I almost want to like download and just listen to. That's a good one. Eddie Thorpe is just, they gave him like 2 quick vignettes and quickly debuted him, I think 2 weeks ago. Or a week, was it the week before Stand and Deliver? Either way. Not a whole lot of production hype, not a lot of fanfare. Of course, the smart fans know about him and were excited about him, but just me personally, thus far in the 2 matches I've seen from him on NXT, and I know he's been on Level Up. I don't watch Level Up, so I don't know. but the two matches I've seen on NXT so far, just a little bit underwhelming to me. I I feel like this guy needs somebody. He needs a group. He needs, I don't know. I haven't thought about it that much. Again, I just watched NXT like a couple hours ago. So I haven't had time to brainstorm why I'm feeling this way about Eddie Thorpe, but I haven't been able to get into it like I've been able to get into Dragon Lee. I've absolutely loved Dragon Lee thus far. He has been absolutely fucking awesome. And I've added him to my handful of guys that every time I hear they're going to be on the card, I get excited because I know they're going to have a great match. Eddie Thorpe, FKA Carl Fredericks, just hasn't done it for me yet. I know he is good. I'm not shitting on the guy. But I feel like it's that Thatcher Cross dilemma again, where one just kind of outshines the other. And like I said, I loved Thatcher. It doesn't make Thatcher any less of a competitor or a superstar. Just as this doesn't make Eddie Thorpe any less of a superstar. I still like him. I want to see what he does moving forward. I just feel like he needs some juice, man. He needs something else. But he's only had 2 matches on NXT so far. We'll see how it goes. I just wanted to mention that because I felt a little bad feeling that way, and I don't know. I just wanted to vocalize it. I'm sorry, Eddie Thorpe, but I will give you more time. Just to this point, it's just felt a little bland. I got like one of my dream matches tonight. Tiffany Stratton versus Sol Ruca. This is a visual of the future of the women's division. I believe this is the first time these two have competed against each other, at least in a singles match. I think in any match period. This is, mark my words, this is the first match of what will eventually be a legendary set of matches. This match right here, these two against each other, is future gold, my friend. It's weird to say now because it's so early. It's their first match. Maybe I'm just overly excited. I love Stratton and I love Ruka. I think they are two of the cornerstones of the future of women's wrestling, in particular the women's division in WWE. This is the first of what will be a legendary bulk of matches in the future. I can't stress enough how much I think these two will be at the top one day. Not only in NXT, but in WWE altogether. This was a great match. It was, to me, a glimpse into what is to come. These two are phenomenal. Sorry, Roxanne Perez. Sorry, Cora Jade. You're both good in your own right. But these two are athletes beyond comparison. And good God, I may be the only one talking this matchup so highly, and that's fine. I don't care. This is what I see. This is what I personally feel about this. This was the first match of something amazing to come. Tiffany Stratton versus Sol Ruca is going to be one of those. It's going to be like a rivalry. Like, you know how I think it's A&E has been having the rivalry specials. They talk about like the most historic rivalries in WWE. Maybe this early on that's too much, but I personally feel this is the first match in a potential rivalry that may, long in the future, will end up being one of those rivalries, worthy of its own biography show, its own A&E biography episode. We might be looking at a future WrestleMania women's title main event. This may have been a glimpse at that. I feel that way. Stratton, Ruca, they're it going forward. I've said this before. Everybody wants to say Cora Jade and Roxanne Perez are those pillars. I say it's Sol Ruca and Tiffany Stratton. And also Lyra Valkyria. Say what you want, man. I'm putting all my chips in on these two. This was a great match. Stratton won, made sense. Sol Ruka, newer than Stratton. I think they're both capable of beating each other. And I think it won't be long before these two are in an intense rivalry for the NXT Women's Championship. And I wouldn't be surprised if Stratton's the next one to get her hands on that title. So after that, Cora Jade comes out and roasts everybody on the women's roster. She talks her shit. She roasts everyone in the building in the women's division. And okay. I mean, I guess my favorite part about this was Valkyria coming out and just laying the smackdown a little bit on Cora Jade. Lyra is in my three-headed monster of the future of the women's division. So seeing her smack the hell out of Cora a bit after Cora talked her shit was gratifying. Anyway, that happened. I'm starting to wonder if NXT/WWE even knows who NXT Anonymous is going to be anymore. They kind of have been rolling with this for a few months at this point. It just keeps going. I mean, at first, when it first started, I thought it was Scripps, but then NXT Anonymous did a NXT Anonymous video on Scripps, so I don't think it's Scripps. I don't know who it could be. It's got shades of Mustafa Ali when he was still not yet revealed as the leader of Retribution, when he was still doing those weird hacker segments in the shadows. I'm starting to think this has been going on for so long, and it kind of off and on. Like, it seems to disappear for a few weeks, then rear its head again. I wonder if NXT is still like, well, what the fuck? What are we going to do with this Anonymous thing? But, so they showed Stax and Tony D attacking Pretty Deadly. And, alright. that was also a thing. And then Grayson Waller goes on to win the Fatal 4-Way to determine the number one contender for Carmelo Hayes and his NXT championship, and to be in the title match at Spring Breakin' coming up in a couple weeks. So Grayson Waller gets another shot at the title. Also in this match was Duke Hudson, who was allowed in the match by Braun Breaker, who also claimed that the NXT title was a curse to his career. Interesting. But Duke Hudson in place of Braun Breaker, also Dragon Lee, and JD McDonough. Great match. I was kind of expecting JD McDonough to win because I think Grayson still has the stink of losing to Johnny Gargano needlessly on him. So I just assumed it would be JD, because Carmelo's kind of a face now, so it's kind of got to be a heel in this scenario. I didn't think Dragon Lee was going to win. I didn't think Duke Hudson, kind of a face, was going to win. But I also expected Braun Breaker to get involved in this match somehow. He did not. But yeah, we get Waller and Carmelo at Spring Break-In. That'll be good. Both those guys are pretty good. Oh, well, what am I saying? Carmelo is great. Grayson Waller is decent. Also, during this night, we saw Brooks Jensen try to get involved in the women's tag title match, trying to give Fallon Henley the Kiana James's bag to use to cheat, and Josh Briggs was not a fan of it. Fallon Henley was not a fan of it. Jensen pushes Briggs down. This whole story is kind of a nothing burger to me. I'm just happy Alba Fire and Isla Dawn are the tag team champions. The country bumpkin feud uh, with Kiana James isn't doing much for me, but it happened tonight. You know, I know it seems like I didn't take some of these spots on NXT tonight seriously, but overall, I did enjoy tonight's episode. Uh, I continue to have a revived hope for NXT. There's a lot of great superstars on this roster at this point, especially with the addition of Dragon Lee. We'll see what Eddie Thorpe does. Carmelo's going to be a great champion. I'm glad Braun Breaker is a dick now, and I was super thrilled to see Tiffany Stratton versus Sol Ruca. That was on my dream match list for NXT. I loved seeing those two finally get in the ring together, and I think it's a glimpse into the future. NXT's future is bright. WWE's future is slightly more bright, considering we got a couple of good episodes of Raw and SmackDown in after a disastrous post-WrestleMania Monday Night Raw. We can all breathe a little easier, sleep a little better as wrestling fans, as WWE fans, knowing that Vince is taking a more remote approach and having a far more minimal impact on these episodes. Hopefully that remains to be the case, but man, I'm just relieved these episodes were at least good, at least passable. They did not stink of Vince McMahon, and that makes me feel a whole lot better moving forward for WWE products as a whole. SmackDown was good, Raw was good, NXT was good, Vince is working remotely. Thank you, God. We'll talk more about everything else heading into Backlash, heading into Spring Break-In, heading into NXT Battleground. Next time on Facebuster Wrestling Podcast. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time. Take care.